Warning, spoilers ahead. Also, if you hear rain, it's storming as I film this. So, in the meantime, let's count the medals 1, 2, and 3 and go on with this review. Okay, so before I start, just a little bit of a preface. If you have not watched Kamen Rider OOO or the movie War Megamax, go do that, as some of the story beats from that will play into this film. If not, I will just go ahead and give you a little bit of context before moving on to the formal review and synopsis of this film. So, in the original Kamen Rider OOO series, it kind of ends in a little bit of a downer note, as Ank's core metal starts to shatter, holding on by a thread. Ank, in an act of selflessness, saves Eiji from going berserk in using the Puto-Tira metals to fight the final enemy. In doing so, he ends up giving him every single last one of his medals. All of them. This episode ends great, as the final fight, Eiji gets assistance from Ank's spirit, as he knows this will be probably the last time that they fight together. All the core metals are seemingly absorbed and gone for good. Eiji falls down from the sky, having one last conversation with Ank before he fades into the next life. He leaves on a journey to find a way to revive his friend and helping strangers along the way. In the following year, we have the events of the movie War Megamax. In this film, an evil Kamen Rider from the future wreaks havoc. This is when Ank shows up, to everyone's surprise, to assist with the fight. However, it turns out that this Ank is also from the future, which reignites Eiji's hope that he will succeed in reviving Ank in the future. Now on to this film. In the depths of his afterlife, Ank starts hearing Eiji's voice. He asks him to return. This desire restores Ank's core metal, and he is sent to the current year of 2021. And man, the Rona really hit this place hard. Oh, that's not what happened. Oh, the Greeds are back? And who the hell is that O's? Oh, he's the original O's. The king from 800 years ago? How did he come back? Suddenly. Oh, but how? Suddenly, you say. Oh, that's some real amazing writing you got there. So the human forces have developed a resistance force to fight against the Greed and the new O's king. This is founded by the Kogami Foundation. They attempt to stop the king and his greeds with no real luck. The biggest damage from this fight actually happens with Hina's crazy strength with the assistance of Kaito's mom, after she went world hopping in Zenkaiger. So, she just took a little bit of a detour. Look, I know she was part of the original cast. In this fight, Shingo almost gets crushed. That's when Ank shows up to take over his body once again and gets completely fabulous. Get it, boy. I mean, man. Wait, how old is Ank's actor, Ryosuke? 35? Gives me an excuse to stay fabulous for a few more years. Ank meets up with Eiji on the battlefield to a cool slow motion explosion. They get away just so Eiji can give Ank a wardrobe change to his classic attire. Afterwards, Ank goes ahead and finds the rest of the supporting cast to get filled in on the events of the world. That's when the president of the Kogami Foundation tells us exactly what I want to know. The king is back. Okay, but how? He's back. Yes, but how?
Happy birthday!
Jesus. So backstory, and just so you know, if you take a shot during this next portion, for every time I say the word desire, yeah. Good luck. President Kogami is the descendant of the original O's, a man whose desires led to the creation of the core metals to feed on one's desires. He had the desire to control everything and led to a siege across Europe. Eventually, he tried to scan all the core metals at once, but the power was too great and did him in. What's that, only like 3 desires? You should be good. You should be good. Now, for every other time I say it in this review, maybe. Maybe. So now the king is back with this ugly ass robe and cracked helmet. You know, I really don't care for the look of this at all. From the show's context, we kind of already knew that he looked exactly like the basic Tatoba combo of O's, so why stop at the head, and why not make everything else on the outfit look weathered and cracked? This would have looked way better than this. Back to Ankh getting the scoop from everybody else. It's revealed that right before Ankh's revival, Eiji was busy losing to King O's, especially after he turned his sight to a little girl, which Eiji, appropriate to his character, rushes in to save. Turns out that he's been missing sense, but that can't be, cause Ankh just ran into him. So they set out to meet with Eiji, only to notice something off about him. That's when Uva attacks. Eiji acts completely out of character down to his fighting, in which I mean he wrecks Uva like me tearing through my drinks on Twitch streams. They call out Eiji for clearly not being, well, Eiji, but someone else. He then reveals himself to be a greed named Goda. This greed was created from Eiji's own desires by the Kogami Foundation. However, as it turns out, the previous fight with the king and Eiji's sacrifice put him right at death's door, and without Goda, he's essentially as good as dead. This puts them in a tough spot and are forced to help Goda as the new O's to take down the king. Meanwhile, after Uva's loss, the king himself decides to just go ahead and absorb all the other greeds and manifest the biggest kit bash Kamen Rider kit yet, with reused assets galore. Even the Momotaro's form is snuck in there as a repaint. Oh yeah, so Goto and Date are in this. I forgot to mention them. They are the first to face off against the king's new form with 0 success. Goto shows up to the fray and has some success, although ultimately loses, as the king attempts to take his core metals, but eats crow instead. While inside the king, Ankh throws out the Puto Tira metals over to Goda, allowing him to completely decimate the king and free Ankh with his full body. However, with all the core metals in one place, this makes Goda greedy, and attempts to absorb them all, since Eiji had successfully done so in the past. This brings out his own core metals, 2 of which were actually shown off in the movie War film as a future project. That's a deep cut. Now, this form is seemingly much better. It still uses the Tatoba base and the new kingly assets, but the new head and leg designs, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. Ankh ends up fighting him, but is quickly tossed to a pile of metals and a hand again. Luckily, Date shows up and creates enough of an opening for Eiji to try and hold Goda back. Goda then releases Eiji's body as Ankh then possesses him, trying to keep him alive. This is Date and Goto's time to shine as they go ahead and henshin. However, Goto's birth driver has a new add-on, which allows him to use a core metal combo. In this case, the ones from the O's summer movie from way back when. But these are artificial reconstructs. But it's another deep cut though. He transforms into Birth X, which is a terrible name. Birth X sounds like abortion. Like, you might as well just call this man Kamen Rider Abortion. Oh my god. It's so bad. Anyway, terrible name aside, Birth X is actually a pretty streamlined looking suit, and I love the overall aesthetics and design to it. Oh yeah, so Ankh and Eiji are fused now. This allows them to have a heart-to-heart in which Eiji admits that he was already on death's door when he made his desire to revive Ankh known, literally waging his life for his. A life for a life. His voice being close to the end itself is what called out to Ankh and restored his mettle. This final will and combined feelings gave new life to Ankh's core metals and gives us Tajador Eternity. 10 out of 10. Amazing suit. No complaints. This suit is sexy as fuck. So remember what I said in the beginning of the review in terms of how the O's final fight ends up playing out? Well, in this one, we kind of get a role reversal, as Eiji this time is the one assisting Ankh with the finishes. This is a glorious rider kick moment. Kind of reminds me of the father-son Kamehameha from the Cell Saga of Dragon Ball. So good. They finish off Goda and Eiji tosses Ankh outside of his body. Eiji is then left to his final moments. He says his thanks and is granted solace in knowing that the girl he gave his life to protect is alive and well. With that said, Hino Eiji dies. A man who put others before himself, gave up his worldly belongings and traveled the world helping others. In the end, used his life to bring back his friend, who, after the grief is over, now has a restored sense of life and his desire to actually live be granted. This retroactively makes his appearance in Movie War Megamax much more impactful, as this is the future of this Ankh, the one who had to bear the death of Eiji, but at the cost of his own revival. It's very bittersweet. Side note, however, no one really gives a fuck about Shingo, as he's just stuck being puppeted by Ankh, right? Or am I the only one that noticed this? Come on. Back to the seriousness, however, I did not expect to go into this movie as a grown-ass man and be crying at the end. But holy fuck, I actually did have literal tears rolling down my face. In terms of the season itself, O's is an average show for me. It was a very episodic show with lore feeling a little bit weightless in comparison to others. But the growth between Eiji and Ankh is really part of the reason why you stick around with the show, as one's selflessness counterbalances the other one's selfishness. It's like a different take on what Double tried doing, but it works so much better in this season. In terms of the movie, however, the initial plot setup is my biggest criticism, as it's just weak. We don't get a satisfying reason for the King's revival. I've watched it 4 times now, and the 2 net movies that predated it, and they only really set up Birth X and Eiji's knowledge on what he had to do to bring Ankh back. And I feel that the issues that we run into with these V cinemas is that their runtime is a little less than an hour. So that's about 2, maybe 2.5 episodes worth of content. As such, there are pacing issues for specific shows. Now, this can work much better in the Sentai-based shows, which tend to be very minimal when it comes to their overarching narrative. But for shows as plot dense as Kamen Riders tend to be, this is a bit of an issue. Now, to be fair, there's the crossover movies, but the crossover movies have no weight to them whatsoever. I feel that if the movie had an additional 30 minutes of time, we could have had at least much more fleshed out plot points, more to Goda and his explainer, a proper sequence of events leading to the King's revival. So, with that being said, I would say that the first 2/3 of this film are about a low B, almost a C. However, in my opinion, they stuck the fucking landing. That last third of the movie would get a Super 1. But it's not though. It's not though. So we got to counterbalance all of it, the good and the bad. So overall, I would say it's a low A, almost a B. Like I mentioned before, I honestly did not expect to go into this movie with tears at the end, but it was great. And I understand that some people are going to have some mixed reactions towards the ending of this movie being a little bit more, being an additional downer to the downer we already had before. So we can't always have happy endings. Bittersweet is what I'm used to with my writer show endings, and bittersweet is what we got. So, what did you think of this V Cinema? Did it wrap up the O storyline well for you? Also, what did you not like? And what other Kamen Rider movies would you like to see get a 10 years after V Cinema that, makes sense? I look forward to the discussions as usual, as I know that it is a controversial movie for some. So, until next time, that's it for me. Bye. So I initially filmed this while trying to replicate Ank's hair. I watched the video of it and I was like, this looks terrible. Delete this curse thing. It's probably because I don't have shaved sides. That's not happening. That's definitely not happening.